So
So
just
we've
like,
got a...
oh, sorry. Sorry.
Well,
Maybe,
let us know.
yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
This is so hard to do. Oh, you first.
Hey everyone, I'm David, beauty director at Sephora.
And Myiesha, also a beauty director. And today's video is all about powder foundation. Powder foundation can be great because it's very easy to wear. It gives you this beautiful matte finish, but I think there's some things that you need to keep in mind when you are wearing powder foundation, and those are the things we're gonna go over today.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to powder foundation, and it's kind of a vintage thing, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's cycled, right? Yeah, it's like, it was really popular when I started doing makeup, and then it kind of fell out of fashion, and then like many things, it comes back, and it comes back in newer forms, but there's some really great attributes and benefits. Powder foundation feels lighter on the skin for a lot of people. It's an ideal formula for anyone who has extremely oily skin because you're not adding any additional liquid or emollient compounds that are found in liquid foundations. So you're basically just getting the pigment in its powder form that can work with your own oil. So it decreases shine, it provides you sheer to full coverage, which a lot of people are shocked about. And it's also easier to apply. I know so many people are like, wait, you can get full coverage? Yeah, you can get full coverage with the powder foundation. And also, it's a lot easier for a lot of people to apply it and have it look soft and even because there's no harsh lines with a powder. When you apply, you're applying in these soft layers that almost create veils of coverage. So even if you're not the best applicator when it comes to artistry, you can still create a flawless look that's lightweight and easy to create. So that's a huge aspect.
Yeah, there's tons of different ways to use it. Like if you've ever seen me do my complexion on this channel, you know that I love my Laura Mercier Candle Glow powder, which is a very, very sheer powder, but I kind of use it to sort of, as my safety net to kind of like sheer out the skin, or if I wanted to use something full coverage, like there's so many different things that you can do with powder foundation. There's also some things to keep in mind when you're matching powder foundation. As David said, it kind of goes in and out. Like when I started years ago, I would spend hours a day in store matching powder foundation because there's sort of a science to it, I feel. I like to think of powder foundation is if you've ever made a cake before. I know David doesn't cook. I know him well enough to know he does not cook. But when you make a cake, you take your dry ingredients and you mix it with your wet ingredients. And your wet ingredients kind of get a little bit darker. Powder foundation is basically the same thing as liquid foundation, but it's mixed with something different. A liquid foundation is mixed with either an oil or a cream or water base or something like that, but your powder foundation is just your pigment, but pressed, kind of like loose eyeshadow versus pressed eyeshadow. So when you match powder foundation, know that it will get a little bit darker once it lays in the skin, especially if you're oilier. So you always want to keep the undertone true. If you're a yellow or neutral or pink undertone, keep with that. That's the most important thing, I think, with any complexion product. But you want to match a bit lighter. You want to put it on the skin. You want to let it live on the skin, at least for 15 minutes, I would say, when you're trying it in store. But the longer the better. If you know I have super oily skin, like nothing beats my oils. So I like to go pretty light and know that, my skin will be maybe a little bit brighter than I'm used to, but in an hour, it's gonna be perfection. So stick with the undertone that you love and go a few shades lighter until you're happy with the coverage and let it sit. If you wanna speed up that process, a setting spray can be really great when you're matching this powder foundation. It kind of mimics that first sweat. I always joke you put your makeup on and you get a little overheated and your makeup looks great for some reason because that sort of a liquid in the skin, the lipids come through and it just kind of makes it just feel like your skin. So go lighter, but stick with the same undertone.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is prepping the skin. Making sure that you get that perfect powder application, and it really comes down to your skin type. So you're going to want to think about this in terms of whether you're normal to dry or normal to oily. So I'm going to take this from the normal to dry aspect, and Myiesha is going to speak more to the normal to oily. So for me, when I'm working with somebody who is normal, especially as they lean more towards the dry side, there's certain things I'm going to take into consideration if I'm using a powder foundation, and that's going to come down to the skin prep, what I'm using to moisturize with. I want to make sure that skin is really hydrated. I want to make sure it's really exfoliated. You don't want to add dry, flaky skin on the surface, which can be a really common thing with dry skin, and then add a powder on top. It's like desert. You're creating the desert doing that. So a good exfoliator, a great hydrator, and a primer. And that's where the key comes in. I love to use a primer like this one from Milk Makeup. This is the Hydro Grip Primer. It's a fantastic hydrating primer. It plumps the skin. It's very lightweight, but it has a grip, Hydro Grip. And that grip is perfect when you have dry skin, because the problem with a powder foundation and dry skin can come into play later on in the day. As your skin dries out, you basically have a dry powder on dry skin. It can just fall off. You can notice flaking. You can notice a dissolution of your coverage, where all of a sudden you're full coverage in one area and,
just
and half coverage in another.
Gone.
patches just disappeared. So a great primer like this works as almost like a grip. It's going to grab that powder and it's going to hold it there. And it's going to provide your skin with that extra hydration. It's going to provide your powder with a nice surface gripping so that it stays there. So you can enjoy those benefits of the powder foundation and not worry about those bad side effects. Now, Myiesha, I'll let you talk about normal to oily.
Yeah, so normal to oily skin, I love the Hydro Grip Milk Primer. My sebum, my oil level is basically gripping everything I put on my face already. So usually when I use that, I use it in areas like my jawline, which tends to be a bit drier. Now, if you have oilier skin, you want to make sure, or just all skin types, you want to make sure any skincare, serums, moisturizers you are applying to the face are completely absorbed and dry before you go in with powder. Another cake analogy, you don't want, like balling up and cakiness to happen, literal cakiness on the face by putting on a powder on top of skincare that is too wet. Oftentimes I will do that with liquid foundation because I like that glow that serums and moisturizers can give to liquid foundation. But powder foundation, you want to make sure that's all absorbed. I would say go ahead and prep your skin when you're brushing your teeth, doing whatever. Give yourself a few minutes, drink some coffee, and then go ahead and apply your powder foundation when everything is absorbed. If you even want to help it along, sometimes I will take just a very, very sheer light dusting of translucent powder just to make sure everything is nice and absorbed and dry. Now, I will always use an oil control primer. After my skin is prepped really nicely, I would recommend a niacinamide type of serum is going to be really great because it's going to control the oil, but it's also going to keep your oils balanced and keep your skin hydrated. This is from Makeup Forever. This is the Step 1 Shine Control Primer, and this is really great because your oils are going to come through if you have oily skin. And when you have very oily skin, that's why I said it's very important to match a bit lighter. You know that it's going to get a little bit darker, a little bit dewier during the day, so you want to combat that as much as possible. You can put this on all over if you're oily all over, or you can just put it on the center of your face if you like. But I find that for oily skin, starting with a nice dry but not dehydrated surface is best.
Okay, so now let's talk about some powder foundations. There is a really new, exciting launch from Fenty Beauty by Rihanna.
So this is the Fenty Beauty by Rihanna Pro Filter Soft Matte Powder Foundation. This is the shade 370. I literally have Fenty stuff on my vanity because it looks beautiful too, because I use it. So this is gorgeous. You could use this by itself. I always use powder foundations as sort of a topper to my liquid. I would do thin layers of each so I didn't feel like I had a ton of makeup on, but I would use that powder foundation as a little safety net to cover little blemishes that I wanted to cover without going in with concealer and being very meticulous. I found that worked really well for me. I found that we're going to talk about different brushes to use with it. I found that gave me a really flawless finish. So you can experiment with it, or you can even use, like this is a brighter shade, this is 280. You could even use it just to give a little bit more brightening in the center of the face if you want to kind of like boost that highlight. You can use it in many different ways. I also recommend powder foundation for people that are fair, that can't find bronzer. Just use like a skin tone color like this and it works really great too. So
I tend to use powder foundations as my bronzers because I find the colors actually match better than traditional bronzer colors because I run very neutral in my skin tone, and that's a really good point. But I think in terms of like powder foundation as well, it's also like you want to think about the same thing you would think about when it comes to liquid foundation. Coverage, for example. How do you achieve the different levels of coverage, right? With the liquid, we know we can apply with our fingers to get really sheer. You can apply with a beauty blender. You can apply with a brush. Well, powder foundations, you can use different types of brushes. You can also use sponges for touch-ups and sort of an additional little extra coverage area. I would be very specific when applying with a sponge all over the face. It can be, you really want to be much more comfortable with that usage, but consider your brushes. This is going to be your best friend and your tool when it comes to powder foundations. A nice dense brush like this one from Sephora collection. This is the number 70. This is a great powder foundation brush to achieve a full coverage, easy application. The way you're going to use it in a swirling buffing motion is really going to deposit those powder pigments onto the skin in a quick, easy, smooth, flawless application, whereas something fluffier is going to give you a soft, sheer, dusting, light coverage. So you really have a lot of options when it comes to that powder foundation formula of creating a multitude of coverages and finishes.
David talks about the number 70. The denser the brush, or the more tightly packed the brush, I would say the more coverage. But you also ultimately have control with the way you apply, how much you apply, and whatnot. But the denser the brush, the more coverage. I really enjoy the 64 because I use it for liquid and powder. It's just a little bit softer, less dense than this one right here, but it'll give you a similar effect. And then our old reliable number 96. I feel like everybody has one of these. It just kind of works for so many different things. And the reason why we say a brush is important, or you could get the Fenty has a little retractable brush that you can keep in your bag. That works really well too. The sponges tend to apply very targeted amounts of powder, or very full coverages amount of powder. So I would say this is just for touch-ups, and be very delicate with the way you use it, because I feel like I've watched so many people apply powder finish for the first time, and they go in and they think they need so much more than they do, and they swirl a bunch of times, and then they swipe, and they have basically enough powder foundation for their entire face in this one swipe. I've seen it so I can recall it so many times in my memory. So the reason why we recommend using a brush upon first application or in the morning or whatnot is because you will get more of an even application.
Softer,
you won't use you will not use as much as you think you need to, especially if you're kind of doing it the way I used to do it back in the day, with kind of layering it very lightly, dusting it over my liquid foundation or BB cream. This would be for touch-ups, and you want to keep this super clean. Like, again, back to the cakey reference, if this has oils or just, the nastiness that's out in the environment, on it, and it's building up, it's going to change the color of the application. It's going to change the color of the powder foundation. So you want to keep this super clean. I would say this one's a pretty good size. Use one side and flip it over, and you get 4 days out of it, maybe, or even 2 if you have really sensitive or blemish prone skin, and go ahead and clean it. You could just clean this with whatever you clean your regular sponges with, and a clean sponge for your touch-ups is going to give you much more of a flawless application, and it's going to make your powder foundation last much longer. I would say you can even do this and give yourself a little blemish coverage, just that little dot, and kind of dot it on there, and you can use the clean side just to buff it out.
And another thing that's really key when it comes to powder foundation is the benefit is also when you find your color, you find your shade of your foundation, you apply it to the coverage you want. But then when you take that powder foundation, because they're small compacts with you on the go throughout the day, you don't need anything else. That is your touch-up, because at this point now that powder will be great to absorb excess oils, to reset and refresh your makeup. So it really is one product that is your foundation, your cover-up, your technically could be your concealing, if you use it like Myiesha was saying with the sponge. So a lot of people love that aspect about a powder foundation, is it's extremely versatile. It's an extremely versatile formula to use.
So the importance of prepping, you can see right here is the 370. I let the skincare and the primer soak in properly. It's on there evenly. It gave me some pretty good coverage. I applied it with a sponge. Now this is when I did not let the skincare and the primer soak in properly. It was still pretty wet as I was putting it on, and you can see there's like a blotch right here. You can see my skin coming through because it just wasn't even. So, and it's also kind of a totally different color. It's like richer. So that's why it's important to make sure whatever you're prepping with is soaked in properly. Your skin can still feel plump and hydrated, but you don't want it to feel wet to the touch. You don't want to feel any like rolling or buildup of primer. Just make sure it's nice and smooth.
So for me, what I think is probably one of the most important steps when it comes to achieving a perfect powder foundation application is actually in the setting spray. That moment, and Myiesha touched on this briefly, is the moment you add the emolliency of a setting spray, a liquid, onto the powder, and it really creates that melted in, supernatural skin-like finish that we're all looking for. A lot of people shy away from powder foundations because they're afraid they're going to look drier or they're going to see this powdery sort of texture. I mean, honestly, once your skin's oils start doing their thing and your body heat and everything works in, the powder melts in on its own. But for instant results, it's then that setting spray. So I like a nice hydrating setting spray, especially if you lean towards the drier skin zone. So something like Fenty Beauty, they have What It Do, and this is their makeup refreshing spray. It's a great spray. You can use this actually before as well as during and after. So what I mean by that is you can spray your face after you've prepped it, primed it, let it dry, like Myiesha was saying, because that is a really key element here, is make sure that all your priming things are absorbed. Then apply your powder foundation. If you like the way it looks, or if you're feeling like, maybe this is a little too dusty. Do I have too much on? What might happen is you start adding layers of powders, and your skin's oils or your prime and prep hasn't had a chance to seep into that powder. So it may look a little like, I'm getting dusty. So that's when you literally mist your face, and all of a sudden you're gonna be like, oh my God, this looks amazing. So these are great. They're great ways to finish it, to really create that super nice, really natural skin-like texture to a powder foundation.
Yeah, again, I have to wear a lot of powders in order for my makeup to last, especially when I'm on camera. I can get kind of hot. So I always use a setting spray to sort of bring the life back to my skin. Because if I had my way, I'd be like dewy, glowy all the time. But for longevity, I need quite a bit of powder. And then you add in bronzer, powder blush, and things like that. So setting spray is going to give you that, like, I would say bubble wrap. It kind of bubble wraps your makeup, gives you that beautiful glow, top coats it, so that everything's still intact, but it has that more lived in glow. And I feel like people are afraid to use enough setting spray. Like, as long as you don't touch your face, I thoroughly saturate my face with setting spray all over. And then it's dry within like 30 seconds or something. So use enough setting spray, especially on the areas where you get really dry. For me, that's like around the nose and the jaw area. And then just let it breathe and you're good to go.
And then finally, you can still use all of the rest of the powder products you love, your bronzers, your blushes, all of that stuff. I think a lot of times when it comes to powder foundations, people question, well, can I use, let's say, a highlighter if I want that matte powder foundation, but I still want a little bit of glow? Can I do that? And absolutely you can. Personally, for me, the Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette is fantastic. It is a powder highlighter quad. They come in a variety of different quad shades, so you can choose the one that's best for you and your skin. It's a really finely milled powder, and this is when it comes down to things like, what's the difference between finishing powders and setting powders? Powders all have different milling, fine level of milling to it. So the foundation that you apply is probably going to be slightly of a larger milling, because you want coverage, right? Whereas a highlighter is going to be super fine, like dust. You know what I'm saying? So those two powders layered upon each other is actually going to be fine. And with something like this, you'll see it's so intense. This product is so intense that just a little bit goes a really long way, and it really can, just on the high points of the face, add just a little bit of dimension, especially if you live in the drier skin zone of your face. A little powder highlighter on top of powder foundation, beautiful. beautiful level of dimension, bring it right back to that gorgeous glow you're looking for.
Yeah, I do love this. I replaced like 7 highlighters in my kit with just this, so I do love it. Or like something cool you could do too, if you have more combination dry skin, you could play with your textures. You could definitely wear a cream blush over a powder foundation. It's just about probably tapping as opposed to blending. So you could play with your textures if you want and kind of balance them out. Really matte face, maybe dewy cheeks, or maybe shiny eyes. You could do whatever. You can really play with your makeup. You just want to be purposeful in the way you apply. And I feel like that is an education in powder foundation. Now is like,
yes, I agree.
I feel like now is
agree.
the time to go and try it and, you know, rewatch the video. I think we hit all those points: how to match, how to prep, how to apply, things to consider, why you would want to wear a powder foundation. And again, if you've never even heard of a powder foundation or worn one, I feel like it's like, when I was growing up, like that was what the cool girls did. They pulled out their powder compact in the middle of math class when they had no business touching up, and they had this cool powder that gave them instant coverage. I remember that vividly because I was so jealous I wanted one. So you can do quite a bit with powder foundation. I feel like it's definitely great to have in your arsenal. Back to when we're traveling again, I found that like I cannot deal with Miami without a powder foundation because it is so humid.
Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this video and it's opened your eyes to the benefits and the wonders of powder foundation. Seriously, we haven't seen this category in quite a while, and I think a lot of people are going to find that this is actually the best form of foundation for them. So I highly recommend you check it out. Give it a shot. Let us know in the comment section below what you think about it, what you love. If you are a current user of powder foundation, which one you love to use. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can get new videos like this from us every single week. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.